All right. Hi, I am Alex Kolcheski. I'm here to speak about whether I do or do not support the death penalty. I do support the death penalty. I believe it is a righteous deterrent to wanting to commit a violent personal crime, which would have repercussions to the person that you commit the crime to. So, in this sense, I would say it would be for very violent crimes within the degree of murder, rape, and or violent rape. And a couple arguments I have that go along with this happen to be around the argument with retribution, and retribution being a part of the justice system. In a Supreme Court case, Gregg versus Georgia, is case number 428 U.S. 153 in 1976. A jury found Gregg guilty of armed robbery and murder and sentenced him to death. On appeal, the Georgia Supreme Court affirmed the death sentence except as to its imposition for the robbery conviction. Gregg challenged his remaining death sentence for murder, claiming that his capital sentence was cruel and unusual under the 8th and 4th Amendment. Or 14th, sorry. The conclusion held under the U.S. Supreme Court was a 7-2 decision holding that the punishment of death did not violate his 8th or 14th Amendment rights under all circumstances. In extreme criminal cases, which is kind of where I was at with my argument, extreme criminal cases, such as when a defendant has been convicted of deliberately killing another, the careful and judicious use of the death penalty may be appropriate if carefully employed.
The death penalty is legal in 29 states and is constitutional under the 5th and 14th Amendments. Under these amendments, it is stated that a person may not be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. For my own beliefs, I am a supporter of the death penalty for the reason of it being a big deterrent for taking someone's life, as you will have your life taken from you as well. I'm also a believer in an eye for an eye, and in this case, a life for a life. I also believe that families need the closure, and closure can help the families in their grieving process. I also believe that it is too expensive and unnecessary to house and feed a murderer for life after they have committed such a heinous act. So for all of these reasons, I'm a supporter of the death penalty.
Hi, my name is Nick Wilson, and I will also be defending capital punishment today. And in particular, I wanted to touch on what was brought up before in terms of deterrence and how the whole concept of capital punishment is to show the consequence of committing such an atrocious crime and actually being held liable for what you've done to a family. And that's definitely something that is always one of the pro arguments when it comes to capital punishment, is people need to understand the consequence of doing something like that. In addition, we got Bays versus Rees in 2008 that tested the 8th Amendment, saying, is a 3-way injection, is that cruel? And they were able to determine that it isn't, and that the federal government is trying to, at the best they can, to create something that is not painful and does not torture the person on death row. It's mainly, as stated before, to show the consequence, to say, hey, almost an eye for an eye concept, that if you take a life in such a cruel way, that there's going to be consequences for that.
Good afternoon, my name is Patrick Trainer. Today I'll be discussing the death penalty and why I support it. First of all, there are no statistics or studies that do confirm or deny whether or not the death penalty does in fact deter crime. However, as my experience as a police officer, I have seen that criminals, if there's no mental illness or inability to think for themselves, in effect, there is oftentimes that thought process that goes into committing a crime, regardless of the severity of it. Prior to committing the crime, many criminals, they look at the consequences, and that often plays a big role in their decision making on whether or not they're going to commit that crime in the first place or not. Second of all is the possibility of a reoffender. It is very rare, but it has happened where murderers, for example, have escaped prison and gone out and committed several other murders prior to being convicted again. There's also the fact that these inmates, these violent offenders, pose a very serious threat to the corrections officers as well as other inmates, which having that constant community around you of the inmates and corrections officers, there's always that possibility that they will commit another violent crime, such as a murder.